We're going to look at Game 9 of the recent World Championship match. Anand was white, Kramnik black. Anand kicked off with d4, and after d5 we saw after c4 e6, so a slight deviation from the Slav defence, which would have been c6. After knight f3, knight f6, white now played knight c3, and now the Slavian move c6, so we have a sort of transposition. And after bishop g5, Kramnik played h6. Now Anand, leading the match, perhaps could have played more conservatively here by just taking on f6 immediately. Instead, he allowed black to create a very dynamic position, which was once heavily analysed by Mikhail Botvinnik, I believe. This is really in Russian opening theory, this whole system. After d takes c4, white played e4, and now black plays g5. So this is just the kind of dynamic position Kramnik would like. And I believe he was the first one in with a theoretical novelty, as we'll see soon. After bishop g3, b5, so black is hanging on to that c4 pawn. But white has compensation. You know, it's more difficult potentially for black to castle on the king side because of these weakening pawn moves. But after bishop e2, bishop b7, white played queen c2, knight bd7 was played, and now rook d1, so protecting that d pawn. And after bishop b4, now white plays knight e5, and here is the first innovation from theory, I believe, of queen e7. So Anand just castled, and after knight takes e5, Anand took with his bishop now. Potentially white wants to play f4, but after castles, if f4 is played here, then black has a strong move, knight d7, which kind of embarrasses that bishop. Black would have the threat of f6 trapping the bishop. And in this kind of continuation, knight takes e5, for example, followed by queen takes g5. This would be favourable for black because these pawns are weak. Black would have the two bishops and potentially the g file to attack with. Rook f3, queen takes e5, it will be dangerous for white. So basically white decided to immediately give up that dark squared bishop. So he did bishop takes f6, slightly controversial because black has the two bishops now and potentially the dark squares are going to be good for black. But Anand wanted to get in this quick f4 to try and exploit the theoretically, weakened king side, black's king's position. But after queen g7 e5, if Anand was given the time, he would play knight e4, rook f3 to g3, and fg would be just crushing. But here Kramnik played very energetically indeed by playing immediately c5, offering even pawn sack and offering even the c4 pawn, because he's crumbling the central pawn of white's d4. So after knight takes b5, c takes d4, queen takes c4, black simply supported his bishop with a5, and this also brings in new resources in position like bishop a6, as well as potentially black's got the coordination of bishop and queen on this sensitive g2 square. So Anand's a little bit under pressure. He did say in an interview after this game he thought he was losing at one point, definitely going to lose, but he just held on and on in this game, as we'll see. After rook ac8, he did take on d4, which was facilitated with this king h1, because now there's no bishop c5, and black played now g takes f4. Perhaps stronger would have been actually a move like bishop c5 here. Bishop c5 and now g takes f4, because that would give the chance for bishop e3. For example, bishop f3, bishop e3, which seems quite a tasty position for black. So maybe this is one of the critical variations which Anand had seen and was scared of. But in the game, maybe Kramnik had let off Anand a little bit by playing g takes f4 instead. And after bishop f3, bishop a6 was played, here white played a4, which is slightly loosening on the queen side. Maybe Rybka's suggestion queen b6 might be more precise to try and avoid any loosening. But a4 was played, and after rook c5, it seems black is better slightly because e5 is weak. Potentially there's the g file to attack with. So Anand's having a difficult position here with white. He took on f4, and after rook takes e5, he now played b3. And now Kramnik gave up the light squared bishop. I was a bit surprised he did this at the time. I thought maybe, you know, he'd try and increase the pressure on the G file. The problem is, with any attempt to sort of treble on the G file, White's always got things like rook D7, so there isn't really enough time to try and intensify pressure on G2 very easily. So instead, just Kramnik goes to win the pawn there. So he's a pawn up, but it's opposite coloured bishops, which gives Anand some drawing chances. But on the other hand, you know, sometimes with opposite coloured bishops, the attacks can sometimes be stronger if, you know, the opponent can't easily defend on the light squares. So how did Kramnik play this a pawn up? Potentially, he's also got a dark square attack coming at the white king, so it's not only black needs to be concerned, but white needs to be concerned. So after bishop c2, now bishop e5. So that bishop's on a very good diagonal, potentially, eyeing that sensitive h2 square. After queen f2, bishop b8, so it's very neatly parked there on b8. After queen f3, now rook c5, so the rook potentially is coming to the c3 square to harass the white queen. After bishop d3, rook c3. So Anand didn't mind this self-pin, and his b3 pawn is under fire, but bishop h7 makes it immune at the moment, rook b3, bishop h7, so he didn't have to bother about it. Instead he played g3, and after king h8, now he has to do something to protect that b pawn. So he played actually queen b7, which is adequate here. His position's not falling to bits at the moment. And now Kramnik played f5, so offering the trade of queens, which Anand rejected. He actually played queen b6. So here, after queen e5, this seems to be a critical position where there was some excitement with the idea of playing bishop takes f5 at the time. Now, this is quite critical. If e takes f5, then rook fe1, and this kind of continuation, seemingly very dangerous for black, but after bishop a7, black could give up the h6 pawn and potentially go for this perpetual check line. The bad way of playing this would be rook takes f5. That would really be asking for it in this kind of continuation, getting mated. So basically, maybe that was a missed opportunity for a quicker draw. So if we go back now, after queen e5, queen b7 was played. So pairing potential threats of rook takes d3 followed by queen e4 check. So the white queen not only is protecting that b3 pawn, it's prophylactically protecting on this diagonal against the black queen. And after queen c7, Kramnik, you know, even though he's behind in the match, he doesn't mind the exchange of queens and the potentially drawing opposite coloured bishop ending. He thought he might exert enough pressure to win it, perhaps. But bishop c4 was now played. After rook e8, rook d7. It seems Anand has some, you know, good rook activity here. And after a4, he can just take black's bishop, and after a takes b3, is this passed pawn dangerous enough? Well, the conclusion of the game is that it wasn't. So white's temporarily a bishop up, but there's a menacing threat of b2 and rook c1, just trying to queen this pawn. So Anand was very careful in his defence. He played rook f2. After rook b8, he played rook b2, and he had to factor in here rook c2 as a way to try and push the pawn forward. But if rook c2, here just rook takes followed by bishop f1, and you know, maybe this looks like it will be drawing. This line might be drawing. So after rook b2, h5 was played though. So Kramnik is keeping the pressure a bishop down. But now king g2 and h4 was played. So this seems to be a little bit dangerous, as if Kramnik is ganging up on the g3 pawn. And in the game, actually Anand played a move rook c6. So he's got the idea of bishop d5 to unpin his bishop to try and neutralise this rook on c3. So maybe this is an accurate move, and something like g takes h4 is inferior. G takes h4. Rybka thinks rook a8 actually. So that has some different ideas. Rook a2 followed by ideas of rook c2 check, or just exploiting that pin rather on the bishop. So rook a2 is definitely a threat here. But here, you know, maybe rook b1, rook c2, and it's not so clear. But actually in the game, rook c6 was played, and after hg, rook g8, so seemingly quite scary, but Anand just calmly played rook takes e6, allowing his g-pawn to be taken, because the king is always attacking the rook. So say rook takes g3, king f2, black can't take the bishop without losing the rook, and it will just be a perpetual here. So actually, after rook takes c4, which was played by Kramnik, a draw was agreed here. So unfortunately, even though Kramnik had a lot of pressure during this game, the outcome with the opposite coloured bishop ending wasn't enough to win this game. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.